MP, you have the floor.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and a good morning to you again. A good morning to our support staff, my colleagues, and a good morning to Ms. Hickerson and Ms. Pantaflet. Thank you for being here, and thank you for the presentation. The first word that would come to my mind, that actually came to my mind, would be depressing. And I say this because I've heard it, much of it, so often before. I've heard the plans to address many of the issues mentioned so often before. And why are we still at this stage where taking corrective measures is concerned? So that's why I kind of encompass it the way I did. But thank you once again, and not only for the report this morning, but thank you for basically keeping up the fight. Because if listening to you sort of, wow, again, I can just imagine what it means for you in your work. Stating that, I have a couple of questions. But firstly, before I get to my questions, I want to recommend to this committee or any other committee of Parliament that we again pick up the matter of the environment of this country and climate change in particular in a serious way. And I think back of, for example, the acrobatics report, which stunned the members of Parliament at the time, communication with the government on it in terms of not only what are you doing, but what can be done. And that just kind of fizzled out. I think about the many discussions on the beaches and beach policies, and everything seems to be in the works without priorities being established. No one has to inform me of the limitations that we face, money, capacity, I mean, you name it. But still, we're going to have to, within all that needs to be done, establish some priorities going forward. Stating that, I read, and it might have been part of the presentation as well, is Nature Foundation looking at or suggesting that necessary legislation be drafted? Can it be drafted? Will Nature Foundation take the lead in that? Because otherwise, on this topic too, we're going to go back knowing what is needed, but we don't have legislative capacity, and we could go on. So that's my question with respect to legislation. In all of the research, has any attention been given, and if not, can it be given by Nature Foundation and or some of its partners? And that has to do with climate funding / financing. Question 2. Has anything in this regard been done? And if not, can anything be done from the perspective of Nature Foundation? It's something that I have asked successive ministers of ROMI with respect to the hillside policy. We know of the hillside policy. And I specifically asked a minister of ROMI at the time, how is it applied? Is it, and how is it applied? I mean, of course, I know the policy, I know what it states, but how is it done in practice? Is that instrument worth anything in practice, is my question. And then everything I want to kind of tie into my question regarding necessary legislation, because I don't think we lack policies and studies. It only gets worse in terms of letting time pass over it. So the hillside policy. This has also been a matter of discussion. And at this time, given the service level agreement between Nature Foundation and the government, what, if anything, at this time, triggers the advice from Nature Foundation? Is it just, well, this project I don't think we need an advice, or is there, to use your words, Ms. Hickinson, are there any triggers? Must it happen at any given times? The presentation that we received as Parliament, I am sure at different times, government or governments must have received similar presentations, similar information. At this point in time, where does government stand on the many actions that are being proposed to be undertaken? You know, where do we stand? And actually tying into that question is, how can we bring it all together in terms of this is the situation, these are the steps that need to be taken, what do we need for these steps, and how can we prioritize? Because clearly there are a lot of things to be done. So how in your view, from your view, can we bring it all together? The issue of the invasive species, the monkeys, where do we stand with that? Another such item that, in my opinion, we know it's growing, but until a kind of a shock happens, then, you know, it's just there. And so, yeah, where do we stand with that? And I saw your request, your plea for the involvement, in addition to the Ministry of ROMI, of the ministries of TIAT, which is understandable also from all that you presented, and the Ministry of Education, Culture, Youth and Sport. And with respect to the latter, would that be primarily in terms of awareness, bringing it into the schools, keeping it in the schools, et cetera, et cetera? How close are we to getting something actually done where the discussions between Nature Foundation and the government are concerned as far as the civil works process is concerned? So how far are we to really establish, again, to use your words, Ms. Hickinson, the triggers, you know, when something must happen. If these are the conditions, something must happen, the triggers. With respect to the limited budget of Nature Foundation for the many things that is actually expected and in some cases required of you, what is your type of a budget? How would your budget look? I mean, taking everything into consideration, you know, you can't ask for the world, but just a realistic budget to really get some of the things that you mentioned here that are priority to get them done. And then the green zoning. And of course, we have heard this plan. I particularly have followed the process coming from the government with respect to the zoning of St. Martin. Then that was halted to come to a more standard zoning, green zoning. In the meantime, there are preparatory zoning plans that the government has and that have also been publicized. Are they just there for their colorful nature, or is there something that even now can be done with that information? And Mr. Chairman, I want to leave it here for now. And I want to thank both ladies here this morning for their presentation and support on the topic. Thank you.
Thank you, MP. Would I be able to give the floor directly to Ms. Hickinson? Yes, Ms. Hickinson, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the questions, MP Westcott Williams. Firstly, regarding legislation, the Nature Foundation was able to receive funding from one of our partners called the Blue Marine Foundation to support the creation of nature legislation in St. Martin. The Blue Marine Foundation focuses on protected areas, so it is important for protected areas to be a heavy focus in this program. And the reason that we were allocated this funding is because they do have a thorough understanding of what our capacity issues are, both within Nature Foundation and Government St. Martin. And they've met with the policy team of ROMI and heard the realities of the situation there. So through that funding, we have contracted De Jong Legal of which Ms. Valia Pantaflet is the representative today. So perhaps she could give an update now regarding the legislative work that's currently ongoing with the Nature Foundation.
Ms. Pantaflet, you have the floor.
Good morning. Yes, so I was recently brought on to this project, and what I understand is that, excuse my voice, I'm trying to battle the flu that's going around. What I understand is we've been busy for over a year already to create the legal basis to designate the Little Key as a marine park. We have we submitted the draft already. It already went through vetting by the Council of Advice, and they have submitted their findings. The issues we are having is that the current nature preservation legislation is very conflicting. And so one of the recommendations we got from the Council of Advice was to first address all of those conflicts before moving forward. Alternatively, that we can establish the Little Key Park by national decree containing general measures, but then we simultaneously address all of the other issues. So we have already prepared another report, and we are busy discussing the way forward because, as I understand, we had a meeting with VROMI about 2 weeks ago, and the process has basically stalled for right now because they're unclear how to move forward. So we assured them that we will take a look at everything that has been submitted, even the advice from Legal Affairs, and we will come with some proposals on how we move forward, whether we push through, whether we do a phased in-working trading, as we call it, or if we should start the draft again from scratch, which is not desirable, considering the length of time it has already taken. But again, the issue is that there is a lot of conflicts within the existing legislation that we use as a basis for this national decree. And so we, at some point, we do have to address those as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So that gives a good overview of how the partnership with the Nature Foundation and our legislative work is ongoing. Though because these problems are so systemic throughout the legislation, I will say there is a concern about the amount of funding that was allocated towards this program and whether we'll be able to accomplish what we need to get everything done throughout that project opportunity. Blue Marine is one of our strongest funding partners, and they have always very much supported our work here. So that's what we're hoping. In the end, they're able to fund us all the way through, at least for the Little Key protections. The next question was about climate funding or financing. Climate funding is relatively a broad topic to refer to. We can specifically talk about like blue carbon financing or large-scale proposals for climate change mitigation. There's lots of different options to look into there. One of the ones that would have the fastest return on investment would be establishing a nature fee for stayover tourists in St. Martin, and including that nature fee also for our cruise ship guests. Now, unlike some of the other islands which have instituted nature fees like this, St. Martin does have a unique situation of being an SSS island, and our friends in Statia and Saba come over to St. Martin for things that they need. It cannot be something that is just a blanket. Anybody that steps on the island pays a certain nature fee, because we need to address the fact that Sabans come over here for medical care, or stations come over here because they need to access contractors and things like that. But looking into instituting something like this in the same vein that the COVID insurance fee was instituted would alleviate a lot of the Nature Foundation's current pressure towards the ministry to support our works. other climate financing options, we have partnered with DCNA, the Dutch Caribbean Nature Alliance, and Beneath the Waves Foundation to evaluate what kind of carbon storage our seagrasses have in St. Martin, and seeing if that is something in the long term that could be used as a finance mechanism, though it needs proper thought so that we don't get ourselves into some sort of greenwashing situation where people are throwing money at something but actually doing more damage in the long run. The next question was regarding the hillside policy and its effectiveness. My biggest concern with both the hillside and beach policies are their enforceability. The policies, from my understanding, are just that, a policy, but not an ordinance or a requirement. So it is up to the individuals that are making the decisions on whether or not they will adhere to them. That's something that should be addressed within St. Martin, because due to regime changes or internal conflicts, who is in charge at the time can pick and choose when they're abiding by these policies, and that's not something that should continue in the long run. Right now, for advice from the Nature Foundation, the way that that has been triggered since I have been at the Nature Foundation is up to the policy team at the Ministry of ROMI, pending when they receive something that they need to give advice on. Then they will evaluate whether the Nature Foundation should also give advice on that measure. Though in maybe late January, early February, we had a full program through the Carina Project where we brought in everybody that's involved in the civil works permit into the same room, and we addressed the current issues with the civil works procedure and how unclear it is, and how once you get approval from one person, it's very unclear, even for the developer, who they should go to next. This needs to be a very standard procedure and protocol. There shouldn't be deviations in the civil works permit, particularly if it's just based on who you know working in the office. So we were able to get everybody in the same room, evaluate the current standards of the civil works permit, and the Nature Foundation put forth recommendations of areas, actions, and activities that would and should trigger the different people and infrastructure and policy to reach out to the Nature Foundation as a standard. We were able to highlight biodiversity hotspots from our research, heritage trees that are on the current heritage list, different activities like the removal of mangroves. Those different areas were highlighted so that we can be automatically triggered. Right now, regarding the invasive species program, that is ongoing with the Nature Foundation. We, as handed down from Parliament and then the Ministry of ROMI, we have focused on the monkey species. We were able to do a very in-depth research project this year regarding the population and their impact on native bird species in St. Martin, and we are currently still trapping. One of the hangups of that program, of course, is that due to the lack of public land, we are restricted to working with private residents who request a trap, and then we are able to trap in their properties. So that does cause some limitations. Also, it is a very capacity-heavy program because we are relying on a vet for sedation and euthanasia, which is a high cost, but we need to be as humane as possible. There is already a lot of push from activists against any type of invasive species management, so we are focused on being as humane as possible on every level. And the funding for that, it equals about $50,000 US a year for what we're able to focus it on. So we have a staff member dedicated to it, but that is still a pretty limited budget for what we need to do. One of our other key focuses is collaborating with the French side, because invasive species problems are island-wide problems, not just Dutch side problems. So we have been working with the prefecture and trying to keep up to date on their program and how that's going, so that we can make sure that we are not just putting a Band-Aid on an issue that is exploding on the north side of the island. Regarding our service level agreement, I have put forward a proposal for a service level agreement that would be managed by the Ministry of Education, Youth, Culture, and Sport as well. I think I was able to present that only in late December and then had a meeting with it with Minister Gums very recently about that. The focus of that project would, of course, be public outreach, but also really integrating into the schools. Our school systems are very stretched thin, and expecting teachers to integrate local examples into their testable curriculum is too much to ask. They're barely able to keep up with what they're supposed to do anyway. So a big focus would be looking at the different curriculums, because there are several different curriculums in the St. Martin schools, and seeing where we can integrate local flora and fauna, local plants and animals into the curriculums. So it would be part of the testable material. We wouldn't be, okay, once off, the Nature Foundation comes in and talks about brown pelicans and it's fun. That's nice, but we need to be in the curriculums so that we can be in the classrooms more often and that students grow up with an understanding and appreciation of the nature around them. So the curriculum development and integration would be a big part of that, and resource management. Through a separate project fund, also supported by Blue Marine Foundation, we were able to spend about $15,000 on gaining educational materials and resources that we house currently now at the Nature Foundation, and the teachers are able to kind of rent out for free from us throughout the year, so they sign up for when they want it. We also chose those materials based on feedback from educators and administrators on what they wanted. So we have a lot of things that have to do with like planting and food agriculture growth. We have some solar panel kits. We have a lot of nature-based games and educational activities. We have microscopes because some of the schools didn't have access to microscopes for their labs. And right now, we are able to manage those resources through our one staff member who's based on project funding, who takes those to the teachers, shows them how to use them, gives them examples of how to integrate it into the curriculum. Unfortunately, that staff member's funding was through Project Karina, and we are scrambling right now to sell vehicles to be able to pay for the staff member to stay at the Nature Foundation. I don't have enough funds to allocate somebody dedicated to our outreach and education, and that's a real issue for us. So I'm hoping in the future, when we're looking at budgets, there's funding able to be allocated towards at least one staff member to be focused on that job. Oh, and then the last question I think that I had on the list here was our realistic budget. Through the Ministry of VROMI, we have had our service level agreement since 2014. It was due to renew December 31st of 2024. We have not yet gotten through with that renewal. So we're operating kind of at standard operating procedure. We don't know what's going to happen. But I requested for this round of SLA, which is normally a 3-year contract, an increase for our total funding to be 536,164 guilders. Our current funding, if we include invasive species, is 303,652 guilders. So I asked for a significant increase that would allow for the hiring of 2 more staff and for some of the materials that we currently rely on project funding to come from our service level agreement funding, so that each year when our project funding runs out and we're looking for the next one, we don't have a gap where we can't afford boat fuel or things like that. Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Hickerson. I see that MP Janssen Webster is next on the list. MP, you have the floor.